has been a media-savvy conservative for more years than most of us have been. He began his current organization, Stephen Klaus and Associates, in 1991 to train conservatives to be more effective on television. He's been a faculty member for the Institute, helped us develop our effective television techniques workshop, which we hope that candidates like Delegate Katzen will take advantage of. Through his work, Stephen has had occasion to deal with many of your heroes, ranging from Bill Bennett, Charlton Heston, Nancy Reagan, J.C. Watts, and former President Bush. Today he has the pleasure of introducing our speaker. Stephen is originally from Wisconsin. He and his wife Ellen have 5 children and live in Ashburn, Virginia. Stephen?
Thank you, Denny. Guests and participants of the Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast. I wanted to start this morning with a little story that I thought would put us perhaps in the mood for hearing from Mr. Bozell. I thought it was quite intriguing when I began my search. I've had the pleasure of knowing Brent now for about 6 years, and we've spent a lot of time together in various cities in the country and have worked on different projects. And there's a passion about Brent, frankly, when you get to know him and understand him, and it really is a motivating factor in his life. With that in mind, I'd like to tell you a little story. The famous New York diamond dealer Harry Winston heard about a wealthy Dutch merchant who was looking for a certain kind of diamond to add to his collection. Winston called the merchant, told him that he thought he had the perfect stone, and invited the collector to come to New York and examine it. The collector flew to New York, and Winston assigned a salesman to meet him and show him the diamond. When the salesman presented the diamond to the merchant, he described the expensive stone by pointing out all its fine technical features. The merchant listened and praised the stone, but turned away, and said, "It's a wonderful stone, but not exactly what I wanted." Winston, who had been watching the presentation from a distance, stopped the merchant and asked, "Do you mind if I show you that diamond once again?" The merchant agreed, and Winston presented the same stone. But instead of talking about the technical features of the stone, Winston spoke spontaneously about his own genuine admiration of the diamond, and what a thing of beauty it was. Abruptly, the customer changed his mind and bought the diamond on the spot. While he was waiting for the diamond to be packaged and brought to him, the merchant turned to Winston and asked, "Why did I buy it from you when I had no difficulty saying no to your salesman?" Winston replied, "The salesman is one of the best men in the business, and he knows more about diamonds than I do. I pay him a good salary for what he knows. But I would gladly pay him twice as much if I could put into him something that I have and he lacks. You see, he knows diamonds, but I love them." Now, my friend Brent Bozell and client Brent Bozell knows the media, but he loves the conservative movement. And I think that's what makes him an extraordinary individual in this field. As many of you know, Brent is the founder and president of the Media Research Center. They've been doing good things since 1987, producing newsletters and many books. You may recognize some of them. The media's role in the Clinton presidency, how to identify, expose, and correct liberal media bias. He also founded the Parents Television Council, the only Hollywood organization dedicated to restoring responsibility to the entertainment industry. And if that's not enough, he is a very busy individual. He launched in 1988 their biggest venture yet, the Conservative Communication Center, and many of you know its online news division, CNS News. Now, I have a lot of personal familiarity with that project and had the pleasure of working with Brent on it, and I know firsthand, I had the privilege of videotaping with Rush Limbaugh. I sat literally across from him in the room, and I heard him tell me how much he depends on Brent's conservative news service. Every week, Rush Limbaugh, Paul Harvey, Cal Thomas, Novak, and many others, almost 30 to 40 million people, receive the information that this gentleman who's coming up here in just a moment, they give them the information, they pass it on. He's also executive director of a conservative victory committee. And finally, he's a nationally syndicated writer whose work has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Washington Times, the New York Post, the LA Times, National Review. He's been on NBC's Today Show this morning at 7 a.m. already, CNN's Crossfire, Inside Politics, Larry King Live, and the list goes on and on. Now I'd like you to welcome my friend, Brent Bozell, the one who loves the conservative movement. Please welcome Brent.
Thank you, Stephen, and thanks for those kind words. I wanted to echo what Denny said about Stephen Klaus. All those wonderful things that allegedly we do cost money, and sometimes you have to do some extraordinary things to find the amount of money you need for those programs. One of those extraordinary things is the kind of work that Stephen Klaus comes up with, who's helped me on a number of different projects, always successfully, always exceeding expectations. The most recent one was a little joint project we did a couple of weeks ago where we bid goodbye to the Clinton administration with a funeral. And it was produced by Stephen, and the video's coming out anytime soon. Look for it, not in the Washington Post. I was wondering last night what I was going to talk about today, because I decided purposely not to prepare any notes because I wanted to have just a conversation. And I thought, gosh, what dedication of the conservative movement. I mean, what does it say about the men and women of the conservative movement that you would come at 8 o'clock in the morning to have breakfast and start your day by talking about the liberal media? Well, I have you all trumped, because as soon as I got home last night at 11 o'clock, I got that call from the Today Show asking me to be on at 7 o'clock this morning to talk about sex on primetime television. So if I can do that, you can listen to me. A couple of weeks ago, I was asked by National Public Radio, National People's Radio, to do a commentary on abortion and the media. How in 2 minutes could I explain a bias that the media have on this subject? We'd just done a little study which was rather interesting because, to my thinking, it really showed in an extraordinary way exactly the kind of bias that we see on a daily basis in the movement, but sometimes don't recognize its profoundness. In 1993, in his first day of office, Bill Clinton signed an executive order overturning Ronald Reagan's ban on overseas abortions. In the year 2001, in his first day in office, George W. Bush reinstated that ban on overseas abortions. Now, you've got a case of apples and apples there. The only difference being that George Bush's position is the one that has the support of the American people, because no matter what the public's view on abortion might be, overwhelmingly, some 80% of the public don't want their taxpayer money used to fund abortions here or overseas. How did the media cover these exact same stories? And it was interesting. In all three cases where the three networks were concerned, in Bush's case, it was controversial. In Clinton's case, it was keeping a campaign promise. In fact, ABC said on World News Tonight of Bush, he said, President Bush, this was Peter Jennings, begins by taking a tough line on abortion. 8 years ago, Peter Jennings said of Clinton, President Clinton keeps his word on abortion rights. NBC, Tom Brokaw this year, the new president's very active day, which started on a controversial note, blah, blah, blah. 8 years ago, Brokaw, President Clinton kept a campaign promise. Dan Rather did the exact same thing, but then added, where Bush was concerned, that it was a move to bolster the sharp right flank of his party. So anything that George Bush does is controversial. A few days later, he did some less than conservative thing with some $40 billion from some other silly program I could care less about. And all of a sudden, there were the media once again saying, George Bush kept the campaign promise. I'm thinking, if you do something liberal, you're keeping a promise. If you do something conservative, it's controversial. Is there a pattern? Ladies and gentlemen, watch the debate on the tax cut. It started already. Day after day after day. It's controversy, 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 controversy. Overwhelmingly, the American people want a tax cut. The Democrats are now saying they want a tax cut. I mean, who has a problem with a tax cut? Yet it's all this massive, grandiose tax cut that we can't afford somehow, even though we have a $3 trillion surplus or something. We can't afford half of it to go back to the taxpayers who paid for it in the first place. Somehow that's controversial. So I'm scratching my head and I'm asking myself, okay, I'm George W. and I'm the Bush administration. What the hell do I do? What do I do about this press? We're not going to talk about whether or not the press are or aren't biased. I mean, that's like saying, does Morton Blackwell like TV sets? The point is, what do you do if you're the Bush administration? How do you handle this press that is going to spend the next 4 to 8 years attacking anything you try to do to keep your promises to the American people if that promise has a tinge, a nugget of conservatism in it? How do you handle it? I would submit to you that we know all the ways you shouldn't handle it, because God knows we've tried them and they haven't worked. Let's take a gander at this. Let's go back to 1992. What did George Bush the Elder try? What was his strategy? His strategy was to, 88. His strategy was to kill the media with kindness. I don't know if you folks recall, but I remember in January of 1989, you saw all these press conferences that George Bush the Elder was having every morning going to the press room, bringing birthday cakes to reporters, doing anything he could to ingratiate himself to them. Why? Because George Bush the Elder is a good man. He's a decent man. He's a kind man. And he thought, if I'm nice to them, nicer, gentler, and all that, they, of course, will be nice and gentle to me. Ask him today what he thinks of those same reporters. I thought it was so wonderful after he left office, when he was up at Kennebunkport meeting with some foreign official. A reporter came to his door and knocked on the door, and he opened the door, and this reporter said, we'd like to ask you a question about whatever the issue at hand was. And Bush looked at this woman, and he said, with this beaming smile on his face, he said, I don't have to talk to you anymore. And he slammed the door in her face. And I thought, it took 8 years, but you learned that lesson. Now, killing them with kindness isn't going to work. They're piranhas. They love juicy stories, and many of them, and I don't use this word in any kind of an exaggerating tone, hate conservatives. Brian Gumbel hates conservatives. You can't kill them with kindness. That's not the way to do it. Okay, so cross that one out. That's not going to work. What else? You can try and do you can think about doing what the Republicans did in 1994, which is to ignore the media and not to put that into their strategic vision. Well, do I remember election night in 1994, everybody was celebrating, saying to themselves, we had this new revolution, the Gingrich Revolution. Happy days were here again. In 2 huge upsets, we'd taken the House and the Senate. Everybody was thrilled. I remember writing a letter to our supporters that night suggesting that the Republican Party was about to get demolished. And the worst thing about it was that they weren't even going to have the time to get the license plate of the truck that ran them over, because they had no clue what was coming. What they hadn't factored into this equation was 2 things. One was that they were believing their own press releases, and they were believing a nonsense about a mandate, which they never had. What they had done was to win a whole series of individual races in certain districts and states, but they had never The contract with America had never been offered as a national cause. The public had no clue what the real America had no clue what the contract with America was. It hadn't been defined yet. It was yet to be defined. And yes, indeedy, was it ever defined in 1995 by the national press. I've never seen anything like it in my life. It became the contract on America. When you saw Bob Lichter's study showing that, and I just love this figure, he looked at every national press report, newspaper, magazine, and television between Election Day and Christmas of 1994 with the introduction of Newt Gingrich to the American people. Again, in Washington, we all believe that everyone knows who Newt is. But in the real world, nobody knew who Newt was. Well, by the end of 1994, America knew who Newt Gingrich was. Let me just ask you, as a toss-up question here, what percent of the stories that were done, national stories, between Election Day and the end of the year, 1994, on Newt Gingrich, were positive? What percent were neutral? What percent were negative? Anybody want to throw out a figure for positive stories? 2%? 25%? Okay. 100 negative? You can't beat that number, and yes, sir, you're right. 100% of the stories were negative. Every single national story on Newt Gingrich was negative. Remember the cover of Time magazine, The Gingrich Who Stole Christmas? Every single one. Throughout 1995, you had stories, I recall, clean air, clean water, clean transportation. You have those safeties now. You may be about to lose them. Stay tuned for a special report on ABC News. Promo. Women and children are going to be put naked and hungry on the street, and that's a sin. Washington Post. On and on and on it went. I mean, this is what the message the American people got. That's why when Republicans scratch their head and say, why are we seen as an elitist party that is anti-poor? That's because the media created this image. And the Republican Party had absolutely no strategy to counter that and got demolished. And by the way, they haven't stopped running since. That ain't the strategy. The strategy is not to ignore them. So what do? Do you do what the Republicans then tried to do in 1996 at their convention in California, which is to pretend not to be conservatives and have a convention saying we're anything but conservatives. You right to lifers, we want your vote, we want your grassroots people, we want your money, but please don't let anyone see you here. Reed Larson and your crowd, great guys, we need everything you're doing, we need your commercials, but no, you can't have any spokesman around here. Let's take the religious right. Yeah, guys, you're great, we'll talk to you next week, but no, you can't be on the podium. On and on it went. They wanted to project anything but a conservative agenda for the Republican Party. What did the media do with that? The media had a field day on this one. Why? Because it was hypocritical of the Republican Party to do that, and the Republican Party, as far as I'm concerned, deserved every bit of the tongue lashing it got from the national press on the charge of hypocrisy. Bob Dole, poor Bob Dole, who would be on national television, should I have a tax cut, should I not have a tax cut? Or on national television, should I talk about character or should I not talk about character? This guy who was so desperately afraid to stand up for anything was pilloried relentlessly by the press, as he should have been. No, if you're a conservative, you don't pretend not to be a conservative. Don't use that tactics. All right, so what do you do with the press? 1998, the Republicans came up with a new strategy. This one was one where actually it started in 1995 and it went through the 1998 elections. And it really hasn't stopped being part of the modus operandi of the national Republican leadership since, which is 3 words: run like hell. Don't do anything. Don't do anything that might rock the boat with the media. Don't do anything that might get the media upset with you. Let them attack you and don't respond because you'll make matters worse. I'll give you an example of this. Twice, I've been asked to go up on Capitol Hill to meet with a group of Republican legislators, the good guys. I won't name names, I'll just tell you it's the good guys, most of them. There are about 30 or 40 of them belonging to this one kind of a private group, to talk about what to do about the press. Both times that they brought me up, it was to talk about the tax cut initiative. What should we do? How do we offer a tax cut? Because anytime we suggest a tax cut, we're for the greedy rich, and it just isn't true. And we can't get our message out to the American people. We go right through this filter of the media. It comes in steak, and it goes out sausage on the other end. What do we do to get our story across to the American people? To them, my answer was, what would Ronald Reagan do if he were talking to the American people? Ronald Reagan would give a very simple little story. He would talk about something like a 7-Eleven. You walk into 7-Eleven, you have a $1 bill. You want to buy a big gulp. It costs 69 cents. You give the teller 69 cents. Does he give you your big gulp and then start walking around the store cherry picking 31 cents of other items he thinks you ought to have? Or does he say, here's 31 cents, your change back? And they looked at me, well, what the hell does that mean? What are you trying to say here? I said, don't talk about tax cuts. That's the language, believe it or not. That's the language of the left. Don't talk about tax cuts. It's a tax refund that you're talking about. The American people have overpaid. Don't talk about a 20% versus a 30% versus a 17% versus marginal tax cuts versus capital campaigns. Why doesn't the Republican Party take a position? It's none of our concern. It's not our money. There's been an overpayment. Do you want to give your part of the refund to EPA? Do you want to give it to the World Wildlife Fund? Do you want to give it to pay the national debt? Do you want to give it to support abortions overseas? You do it. It's your money. But we, a Republican Party, are going to take the totality of that overpayment and return it to the taxpayers because it was an overpayment. What is the American public going to do then? Are they going to say, no, we don't want our money back? Who, outside of maybe a few bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., are going to say, we're against that? They looked at me and they said, but what will the media do with that? To which my answer was, they will attack you relentlessly, just like they attacked Ronald Reagan relentlessly. And the more they attack you, the more the American people will love you. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. They looked at me and they thought, good idea, good idea. Of course, I never heard from them again, which is the problem with the Republican Party. And it's really not their fault. It is that they have to take this to the leadership. And the leadership says, no, that's controversial. Offering people their money back is one of those controversial things. We can't do that because we'll get the media mad. The other idea I suggested to them was, why not do something really crazy? When you're on national television and you're talking to Dan Rather, Dan Rather talks about Medicare cuts. In 1995, there were over 1,100 newspaper stories on Medicare cuts proposed by the Republican Party. The only problem being that the Republican Party never proposed Medicare cuts. I said, why don't you, when you're on national television and Dan Rather brings up the subject of proposed Medicare cuts, look at him in the eye and say, based on the research we've done, because it's been provided to us by the Media Research Center, this is the 93rd time this year you've used the term Medicare cut. Mr. Rather, there is no Medicare cut. You have an audience of 5.4 million people. Could you please look into the camera and apologize? Now, what's Dan Rather going to do? Is he going to say, no, Dick Armey, I'll never have you on television again? No. You are going to embarrass him. And what's going to happen? Dan Rather will never use that phrase again. That was a little silly suggestion I offered to them. But to do that is to stand up to the media, which is something the leadership of the Republican Party just will not do. And then, oh, do they boo-hoo, do they boo-hoo, do they boo-hoo when the media beat them up. That's because they're punching bags, and the media know it. So that option is going to work. We're going to 4 options. There's a 5th option. You can do what John McCain did. You can just sell out. If you want good press, sell out. And look and see, okay, what do the media like? The top issue for the media is campaign finance reform. Nobody else cares about that. Look at any poll in America. Nobody gives a hoot about this issue. It is only an issue that the media care about. Look at every poll you want to, and you won't find it anywhere as a blip on the screen. What does John McCain champion? Campaign finance reform. Why? Guaranteed positive press. How about Tax increases, that's a good one. The media like that one. He's championed that. What's the third one? Abortion, and he's championed that one as well. The 1, 2, and 3 issues for the national media are the ones that he's championing right now. It was interesting to me in South Carolina during the primaries. His chief strategist, Mike Murphy, was being interviewed by one reporter, and the reporter said, Bush's constituency is the religious right in South Carolina. What is yours? Without blinking, he shot back the media, and that was the constituency of the McCain campaign, and it is to this day. So that he's on, I mean, I was on the Today Show this morning, there he was on the Today Show as well. He's there every single day. He is the darling of the media. You can do that. The only problem is, if you're a Republican doing that, you ain't ever going to have the title president next to your name. You know, John McCain, who has been elevated to sainthood status by the press, couldn't win any Republican votes in the primaries. Aside from his own state in New Hampshire, he didn't win a single primary last year where he won a single state with a majority of Republican votes. He got Democratic votes that crossed over, and in the exit polls, they all said they were going back to Gore in the general campaign. So it was all mythology, the support that he had around the country. But he's the darling of the press. That will get you nowhere. All right, so we're out of options. Those 5 aren't going to work. So what do you do? It's only been a couple of weeks, but so far I am cautiously optimistic that this team in the White House may, is this real wood? May know what it's doing. They recognize that in the press, they've got an entity they have to deal with, and they have to deal with correctly. And from the way I'm seeing them manage events, I'm seeing them so far manage it rather beautifully. What have they recognized? They've recognized that the media are no longer the monolithic structure that they were 10 years ago. There are a whole wide array of different things in the media that you can now access that you couldn't access 10 years ago. You've got this thing called talk radio that grows and grows and grows. You know, in 1996, the #1 cheerleader for Bob Dole was G. Gordon Liddy, and Dole refused to go on the Liddy Show. I mean, nobody championed him more than Liddy did, but the Dole campaign didn't see any benefit of using talk radio in 1996. Just imagine that. Well, talk radio grows and grows and grows and grows and grows, and Bush used it very well in the campaign, and I suspect they're going to use it very well again. You've got the internet, which is this vast new universe that allows us to get our message out to the American people, and we don't have to go through that darn filter of the national press. Dan Rather can't stop us from saying what we want to say, and Peter Jennings can't twist what we have to say, and we don't have to ask Tom Brokaw for permission to say what it is we want to say. We can communicate directly and instantaneously with the American people. It's a huge revolutionary change for the conservative movement. Third option we have, television. Fox. Fox is growing by leaps and bounds because Fox is offering an alternative to everything else. If you want everything else, go to the other ones. If you want fresh, new approaches, Fox understands this. Don't have a conservative media. Fox is not conservative. It's balanced. It allows both sides to be heard. And ladies and gentlemen, when our position is up against the other side's, we win if we have an equal footing. Our ideas always win. So we don't care that we don't have the camera just to ourselves the way the liberals have had it all these years. I invite any liberal to come on stage with me. I'll knock the socks out of him because their philosophy doesn't work anymore. It's been tested, it's failed. And all I have to do is say it over and over and over again. You're a failure. So we've got Fox. And the Bush people understand that they have Fox. They also understand that the media are not a monolithic structure internally. There are people in the media who, as I said before, hate conservatives. They are the enemy. They ought to be dealt with like the enemy. The Brian Gumbels of the world. These days, the Dan Rathers of the world. The George Stephanopoulos of the world. They are never going to give us a fair shot. We know they're never going to give us a fair shake. So why is it that we curry favor to them? The position the strategy of the Bush campaign ought to be to ignore them. You don't need them anymore. You don't need to go through Brian Gumbel to get your message out anymore. You don't need to talk to George Stephanopoulos. You don't need to talk to Dan Rather and be abused by him on national television. They seem to understand that. So when you take those people, you just ignore them. The second camp is the conservatives in the press. There are some conservatives in the press. And those conservatives in the press you want to work with. You want to work with the Paul Harveys and the Rush Limbaughs. You want to work with the Bob Novaks. You want to work with the Tony Snows. They are going to get your message out. Again, I'm seeing the Bush people understanding that, and I'm seeing them communicating in ways that this elitism and this arrogance of the Republican Party has said for years, we don't need these people. Henry Hyde had the great comment when he said the conservatives are the great unwashed in the eyes of so many of these establishment Republican people. This Bush team isn't performing this way. They're not behaving that way. They're understanding they need these conservatives, and they're working with them. The third group is the most important, and this is the group that is difficult to deal with. It is the liberals in the press who really do want to do a good job. And believe it or not, there are many liberals in the press, I believe, who, because there is such a national focus on their biases today, 89% of the American people, according to the Pew Center, in a survey done last year, believe the media are now biased. 89%. Doesn't believe that they have a liberal bias, but they do believe that they are biased. They are losing their audiences by the millions. They're all in trouble. CNN just had massive layoffs. ABC just stopped, put an end to its internet operations, lost for $250 million last year. They're all in deep doo-doo financially. They realize they have to do something different. There are people in the press who have all sorts of liberal credentials and who are liberal. But if you make the effort to approach them and give them your side of the story, they will give you good coverage. Who am I talking about? Tim Russert. Look at Tim Russert's background. Tim Russert, worked for a who's who of liberal causes. Yes, there are things he's done on Meet the Press that we don't like, but I guarantee you there are many, many more things that he's done that the Clinton administration didn't like. He has held them accountable, and we have to give him credit for that. Another one, and this is the one where I do this and apologize, Sam Donaldson. Sam Donaldson, the Prince of Darkness to the conservative movement. Sam Donaldson was put back on the White House beat 2 years ago by ABC as their White House correspondent. Sam Donaldson is the only person there who would ask a tough question of Bill Clinton. Sam Donaldson is the only national correspondent who ever confronted Bill Clinton on Juanita Broderick. It was not a conservative. It was Sam Donaldson who did it twice. Sam Donaldson wants to get good stories. Sam Donaldson, and I better stay off the record on this, but Sam Donaldson has told me what he thinks of Bill Clinton, and it's not lullabies. He was a good reporter. He will go after the story. We, as conservatives, have to make sure that the Tim Russers and the Sam Donaldsons, who are liberal, have our side of the story when they're going in to do a report. And I do believe that more often than not, we're going to be surprised by how even-handed they are. The problem that we as conservatives face is that as a movement, we're not very good at this. I hear all manner of excuses. I hear from people when I urge them to make more of an effort to deal with the media. I hear, well, I don't have the budget for it. To which my answer is, well, what's a higher priority? If getting your message out is something you can't afford, then why are you in business? Why are you there? You're there for a paycheck. Or I hear the answer, oh, they'll never listen to me. To which my question is, have you ever tried? Or they'll say, I'm not going to stoop to their level. Sorry, I'll get you a Rolls Royce, and we'll make it easier for you to go do that interview. I mean, there's an arrogance of conservatives when I hear that one, too. You have to roll up your sleeves and get to work with them. The Bush administration, I think, understands this. From what we've seen in the last 2 weeks, the way they're managing this administration, I think they know what they're doing. Knock on wood, if they don't, they will be derailed the way George Bush the Elder was, the way the Republican Party has been. If they know what they're doing, if they deal with the press correctly, working with the right people in the right venues, I think we're going to be very, very pleasantly surprised. Thank you.
Anybody have a question for Brent?
I want to commend you on the funeral ceremony. It's very well done. However,
NPR didn't think so.
you didn't complete the internment. Therefore, we have the Clintons in exile. What is media research going to do about holding their feet to the fire as far as his still getting the taxpayers to spend money, his spending the taxpayers' money in excess? What are you going to do to hold his feet to the fire?
Well,
As well as the gifts and everything else, he has broken all rules and regulations. He is a criminal in chief.
The question related to the continued cost to the taxpayer of our former president and what the Media Research Center is going to do about that.
Right. The MRC focuses primarily on the media. We cover what the media are doing. We don't advance an agenda. Now, our news service does. The idea of the news service is news of, by, and for conservatives. It is the idea of getting the stories out that the national media aren't reporting. And we are looking into that, and we are following that. As a matter of fact, I talked to Ernie Istook last night, who told me that they're now finding that the numbers on the rental for the offices in New York are not 600 and some thousand, it's 800 and some thousand that they found out yesterday in hearings that they had. So we are looking into that. But here's an interesting thing. Up until January 8th, or whenever the inaugural was, there were a lot of reporters who personally, I can tell you this, personally did not like Bill Clinton, but professionally had to curry favor with the administration. A lot of people don't understand the kind of hardball that was played by this administration behind the scenes with the press, where if Gary Aldrich was booked on a show, there would be the phone call to the president of the network saying, if you ever want Bill Clinton on your network again, Gary Aldrich will not be on there. So a network producer would say, well, I've got my option, Gary Aldrich or Bill Clinton or the president of the United States. Cancel Gary Aldrich. That kind of stuff was going on. Guess what? They're not facing that anymore. And what is happening, I think, is that those roosters are coming home to roost right now with Bill Clinton. You're seeing an attitude in some people in the press where they are starting to report this kind of stuff, and they're not holding back on what they're reporting. They are showing the disdain they, too, had for Bill Clinton. They are as liberal as he is liberal, but they feel that he is absolutely corrupt as a human being. So I think they're going to be covered. They're going to be covering it. Also, the other issue is Bill Clinton and the limelight. I mean, one of the points that we were making in the funeral is this man won't go away. I mean, I joke, he's like a bad case of hemorrhoids. He just won't go away. And he won't. I mean, he will do anything to stay in the limelight. The one thing that he likes is interns and spotlights. He can't stay away from those two things. And what's going to happen is that he's going to become, I believe, a laughingstock. I think you're already seeing it. You know, the fact that he was giving an interview on Israeli television on the eve of the elections, endorsing a candidate. He understands the protocol. He understands that's a slap at this administration, that he should never have done that. The fact that he held 3 public events on the day of the inauguration and wouldn't leave. I don't know if you all were watching Fox, but I mean, after a while, Britt Hume was just having a field day with this one. They would cut back to Bill Clinton in the hangar. He's still there. The man will not leave. I mean, it became a joke. So I think he's going to become a bit of a joke because he's got. I don't know. This man loves to get into trouble. He knows what he's doing. He knows full well what he's doing. He has no conscience. He feels he can get away with anything he wants to. But this is a different ballgame now. He's no longer president, and he can no longer make demands that he could make behind the scenes before.
It would seem that one thing we can do, these companies that will pay him $100,000 to go speak, if we know where those companies are, we should take our money out of those accounts that support Bill Clinton.
If you saw the Washington Times today, there's a story on that where shareholders are pulling out.
Good.
Love the guy.
All right.
He's been my broker for 30
Good.
years. Unfortunately, he moved to Merrill Lynch over to Morton Stanley, but I was working.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, let me take a question over here.
I just want to thank you so much for your work for our nation, because you have brought back encouragement to many of us who really are sitting in a position of wanting to do something, but we don't have the availability like you do. Please keep an ear in the White House. However you, which dog you like, or however you favor that kind of relationship, we need you there, Brent. But Brent, I'm also seeing a very interesting parallel, which I need to bring up. Cadillac never advertised when I was a kid. Never did you see a Cadillac advertised. Why? Because they had stigma. They had an integrity and a distinguished posture in the market. I cannot believe how often I'm seeing NARAL promoting choice so sweetly, courting the nation now. We are scaring the socks out of the media. And it's going to cost them big money, the pro-deathers and the liberals. And I want to thank you for helping us with that, because if we can put our money where our hearts really are, to keep our government in tune with the Constitution, and with a guy like you on the front being very, very candid, thank you, sir.
Well, thank you. Let me make a comment on that. Thank you. We need to constantly remind ourselves that America does not think the way people in this godforsaken city think. There is a very different worldview out there from what is being projected on the front pages of the Washington Post every morning. A classic example of that is abortion. Let's give all the credit to the New York Times and CBS, and I'll never do that again, for the survey that they did in January of last year, which just knocked my socks off. They asked the public on abortion. Now, you hear all the narrow people, all the networks tell you about how the country is so pro-choice, and anything pro-life is controversial. Get this for some numbers, and I may not have all of them accurate, but they're close enough. When asked about abortion, 67%, I believe it is, of the public supports a woman's right to choose in the first trimester of abortion. After the first trimester, that number drops to 25%. In the third trimester, it is 7% support it. So when you're talking about abortion, the argument is the first trimester at this point. We have won the second and third trimester debate, and now we're moving them into the first trimester. And get this, when asked, how do you define murder? I gave it away. Abortion. 51% of the American people call it murder. 51% call it murder. Now, there's a great and a kind of a rather sickening contradiction there, isn't there? 51% call murder, 67% say it's okay to do a murder. There are people who say it's murder, but it's okay. But we're moving people in our direction. We are changing the heart and soul. The media don't want to confront that, but there is movement in our direction, and that's good. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. You mentioned you're guardedly optimistic about the Bush administration these first few weeks. Are there any other conservative leaders that you see out there, and also conservative political leaders that you see who handle the media well in the way that you described as you want to handle it?
I probably shouldn't make this as a blanket statement. When I look at the leadership of the Republican Party, no. And when I look at the conservative movement, take Rush Limbaugh. Why is it that Rush does so well? And 2 points on that. One is Rush understands his audience. We conservatives, well, look, we're weird people. We have breakfast at 8 o'clock in the morning to talk about this kind of stuff. The average person doesn't. But we are so passionate. We believe so strongly in those things we believe. Our views are so concrete. We wake up every morning. Richard Vickery says he wakes up every morning and thinks of 3 things he can do to change the world. And we tell the world what we think the world needs to know. We never stop and ask ourselves, what does the world want to hear? What is it interested in? Think of a principle of business here. If you used to open up a store, do you line up your counters with things you want them to buy? Or do you put things on your shelf that they want to buy? Rush Limbaugh understands that principle. He understands that there is not a vast segment of the population that wants to hear GDP figures every morning. He understands the need to make it entertaining. He understands the need to make it fun. And he makes his show fun. And he gets all the points across. But he packages it to an audience in a way the audience wants to hear it, which is why he's got 9-10 million listeners at all times listening to him. I think it's kind of interesting the media say, well, the problem that we're all losing audiences is because there is such a diversity now of networks, of media. It's the competition that's killing us. Nonsense. If that were true, explain to me Rush Limbaugh. Explain to me a guy who had a weekly audience of 18 million 10 years ago. And since then, you've had an explosion of talk radio, where you've got all sorts of other nationally syndicated hosts. You've got in every town in America, you've got the #1 radio show is a conservative talk show. And what is Rush Limbaugh's weekly audience? 18 million. Hasn't changed one bit. Explain that. They're going there because they're getting the voice, the opinions they want to hear. So my answer to conservatives and to the Republican leadership is think in terms of how your audience wants you to get the message. And that's why I said to the Republican leadership, don't talk about 12% and 15% tax cuts. Talk about a general refund. Ronald Reagan never did those things. Ronald Reagan always talked about the shining city on the hill. He talked about a vision, and Washington just dismissed them, simplistic, didn't know what he was talking about. It worked like gangbusters. So in the Republican leadership, I don't see anybody. I see Denny Hastert on television, I shake my head. I see Dick Armey on television, I shake my head. I watch Jim Nicholson on television, I shake my head. They weren't very good, quite frankly, at what they were doing. Then you've got some good guys. I ask myself, who do you have in the Congress who, let's say, might be well-known, who might be charismatic, who might be good-looking and could project himself on television? Let's try a Hall of Fame football player, Steve Largent, who's charismatic, who is known by all of America. If anybody who plays football, he's a hero in his part of the country. Do you ever see Steve Largent on television projected by I love you, Dick Armey, but get out of the way and put Steve Largent on there as your spokesman if you want to get your story out. That's the kind of thing they ought to be doing.
One more.
The radical boosters were quoting this morning about the president's decision to keep Mr. Clinton's current defense budget for this year and for next year. You don't hear it very loud, but it says in the footnote, for now. Can you do anything about making people understand the reprogramming and additional appropriations to take care of the changes?
The question was, if I understood it correctly, that there are people complaining that Bush has announced that he's going to keep the Clinton administration expenditures on the budget for this year, and that it should be explained that the footnote was for now, and that with additional appropriations it could be changed. Is that correct?
The expectation was that he was violating his campaign promise.
And the complaint is that he's violating his campaign promise, and in fact, you're suggesting he's not. That he could be changing the defense budget. That's the kind of thing that it needs oftentimes to be explained. There's so many issues out there that I find so often the media aren't so much biased, but just ignorant about. I cannot believe sometimes just how stupid some people in the press really are when they put their minds to it. Look at the September 12th issue of 1991. I've been in this business too long if I remember that. Of U.S. News and World Report on the eve of the Gulf War, where they talked about the Patriot missile system versus the Scuds. And they said, the U.S. News and World Report said the Scud missile system was going to wipe out the Patriot missile system because the Patriot missile system is stationary. The Scuds are maneuverable, so they'd be able to dodge Patriot missile systems. They had it all wrong. They had it all completely backwards. Was there a bias there? No, there was just unbelievable ignorance. And what you're bringing up is sometimes there is ignorance in this as well. They just don't understand the way the situation works. And that's where education needs to come in. And that's the kind of thing where I'm suggesting conservatives in their different fields of endeavor, whether it is in social causes, whether it's economic primarily, whether it is defense or otherwise, need to make that effort to educate the press, to give the press the facts on the other side of the story, which we really are not very good at doing. We just don't think it's going to go anywhere. Oftentimes you'll be shocked by how far you go when you make a serious and good faith effort to educate the press. You will be shocked by the results you get back. So I urge conservatives to do that at every opportunity. Hope that answers your question. All right, thank you.
Proof that Brent knows what he's talking about. There's as you leave, you might have to get around the camera crew that's followed him here in this next interview. Come back next month, March the 7th. We're going to have P.J. O'Rourke, a fellow who has no trouble putting a little humor into his presentations. If any of you would like a tour of our fine facilities here, including the broadcast facilities, Julianne will be coming up here to the podium afterwards and can lead you on an immediate tour. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.